Okay, let me shuffle some windows and then let's go. By the way, they're also working on the deck outside. So we're going through all the obstacles today, but we're going to power through and make it work. Okay, so let's talk about storytelling in UX. So here are the few things we're going to talk about. So first, I'll talk about storytelling as a UX tool. Then from there, we'll talk about products and experience visions. I'll give you a brief intro to who I am, why you should even care about anything I say. Easy to use story arcs that I've used throughout my career. And then I'll give you a couple tips. I think there's like 3 or 4. And then after that, we'll answer some questions, go from there. So anyway, so a funny thing happens as a company grows. Essentially, it can become disconnected from its customers. And so what I mean by that is you have in the early days, there are some stakeholders and there's some customers, and it's super easy to get customer feedback because you're right there and you can make something and put it in front of them and be like, hey, what do you think of this? So as a company gets bigger, there becomes all these different departments, engineering and product and design and marketing, et cetera. Some of the departments are more customer facing. So you have like sales and customer support. And generally you have to rely on them essentially translating the information to the other teams a lot of times. Let me see people again. Okay, so the stakeholders become disconnected and they sort of rely on all these other teams to communicate information. And a lot of times they'll rely on things like business metrics, so monthly growth in net revenue or, lead velocity rate, all these different things. But the problem is these business metrics are not customer needs. They're not the same thing. And so by optimizing for them, it doesn't necessarily result in a better user experience. There are ways to game those numbers, that kind of thing. So that's where UX steps in. And UX is essentially the storytellers of the group. And so the better you are at telling stories, the more likely you are to get buy-in to initiatives you want, or influence scope for things, or all of the above, essentially. So random fact I found online, I don't really know how they measure this, but stories are apparently remembered up to 22 times more than facts alone. Don't know where they got that number, but we're going to go with it. And it makes sense because they're essentially mnemonic devices for facts. They'll engage our emotions. They're relatable, believable. People just remember them. A lot of times if you put in front of a developer somebody struggling with software, it's just so much more memorable, seeing the story of that person trying to use the thing. So this is a little bit of a story. I was actually going through, Jared Spool actually has a really great UX strategy bootcamp thing that he had. I think we went like 2 summers ago at this point. One of the stories he was telling though, so a lot of times you'll picture Steve Jobs and he's talking about the iPhone and where it's going to go and all that kind of stuff. And there are videos of him from, I think it was like 1988 or so, or it was way before the iPad was released, let's put that way, or iPod. And he's telling these stories about, how things are going to be and how it's going to be connected and all that kind of stuff. And watching the video, you're like, man, this person is such a genius. And he was. But little do people know, Apple actually, when Steve Jobs was not at the company, invested a ton into UX research. And so there was a team, and that team's goal was to essentially establish, what is it like to use a computer 20 years from now? And so if you actually go on YouTube and type in Apple Knowledge Navigator, you'll find this video from 1988, which is essentially this guy using this iPad, even though it's not an iPad, it's the Knowledge Navigator. And it's crazy because like so many of the things actually made it into a production product like years and years later. So when you think about it in terms of the telling the story, this team puts together this thing and they start to tell that story to other people internally in the company. And so what that does is it sort of plants this vision, like this is where we're going, so anything you do should be moving towards this direction. And so one of the things that in that strategy workshop, they kind of emphasized was the fact that you need to establish a solid product vision. So it's where are we going and why does it matter? And really, this is a mix between product design and product management, where product management will kind of do the initial reconnaissance work, But then product design can really use things like Figma and other tools to really tell this story and drive home, this is the future of where we're going. So let's work towards that future together. So each department, as they're moving forward, everybody has the best intentions. They're all running 1,000 miles, 1,000 miles an hour as fast as they can. And if you don't have this product vision, one team's running this way, another team's running this way. With this, you can kind of ask with every decision you make, is this going to get us closer to the flag or further from the flag? So, and it kind of helps in terms of prioritization and alignment between teams and all that kind of stuff. So I've seen this work in terms of effectiveness for cross-department coordination, but questioning where we spend our time, where do we invest our money. But it also helps in terms of like employee engagement and confidence and boosting morale and that kind of stuff as well. So a little bit about myself. So I've been doing product design and working on digital products for about 17 years now. I just grabbed a screenshot from an old resume I had and kind of pasted this here. So I've done all the things at some point in some way. And if I haven't, then, we'd figure it out. But and then companies I've worked at. So I worked at Aweber. They're an email marketing software company. Currently, I work at ThreatQuotient. It's a cybersecurity company. But then on top of that, beyond ADPlist, I mentor for Design Lab, and then I also teach, I did teach, I was an adjunct professor at Philadelphia University, which I taught graduate level UX. On top of that, I've had the fortune to be able to see all kinds of great stories being told through different conferences and stuff, which is really great. And over the years, I've built some really good products. I've also built some really bad products. Again, so right now I'm at ThreatQuotient, and I'm just gonna fast forward through some of these. So essentially, man, losing my train of thought. Okay, so currently at ThreatQuotient, I've mentored over 200 people through Design Lab and that kind of stuff. And I've also helped people navigate, applying for different jobs. So people I've worked with have gotten jobs at like Microsoft and Amtrak and Rock the Vote and Epic Games, etc. If you guys find me on ADPlist, feel free to add me or like schedule a session. Add me on LinkedIn for sure. I can post a link later. So, yeah. And then over the years, I've filled multiple roles, UX designer, researcher, product manager, product owner, design team manager, yada, yada, yada. So cool. So anyway, getting back to it. So one of the things that I've heard in the past, it was on Twitter somewhere, and I can't remember who it was, otherwise I'd give him credit. But 50% of design is actual design work, and 50% is communication. I feel like this is something that boot camps and people kind of new to UX, they don't really understand this. And so they think like, yeah, I'll just go somewhere and I just do the process that the boot camp taught me. And the reality is that's rarely the case. A lot of times you jump into a project in the middle, you kind of pick up where things are and you kind of pick the right exercise that complements it. But beyond that, I think a lot of design is really evangelizing UX, unfortunately. So, but getting to, telling stories, essentially, the way I think about it in my career, there's two things I'm always striving to do. It's either getting buy-in for something or building trust. And when you think about it, so whether you're demoing a finished project or pitching an idea or asking a promotion or, whatever it would be, they all kind of fall in the camp of these two different things. And I have two story arcs that I tend to use that are pretty effective for this. So the first story arc is building trust and the ability to deliver. And so the way this looks is, so essentially it starts with, this is where we were, this is what we learned, and this is how we improved because of it. I'm getting like tons of messages. So here's an example. So before I said I worked at the email marketing software company. So this interface here is actually a drag and drop email builder. It doesn't look the coolest because it's like the plain text mode essentially. But at the time, we were working on this project. So we had all these, different customers. We do usability testing for other projects. And there was a project coming up where we partnered with the stock photo company. And the goal was to allow our customers through this message builder to have access to all these photos for the emails. And so we'd talk to customers and we'd ask them, how do you pick email? How do you pick photos for email? And they're like, oh, I just Google it and take whatever photo. And we're like, okay, how do you know if you're allowed to use that photo or not? And they're like, well, I'm not totally sure. So like, well, that's not good. So anyway, so implement this thing. We spend weeks working on it and going through different stuff, and we ship it. And at the time, I was part of this Scrum team that we had this ritual. Every time we would ship something, we would there's a movie theater room at this company, and so there's a projector essentially. We would get together and we would drink Mountain Dew and eat Doritos like children. And we had this product called Full Story, where it was really creepy. You could see people click through the UI, like literally see like what they're typing and stuff. It would recreate all these sessions, and you could target different parts of the application. So we would set up for here, and we're like, oh man, this is gonna be awesome. People are gonna love this. Set it up, sit in there, waiting for people to go through. Saw a couple people go through, the workflow, but we didn't really see that many people. Engagement for the feature didn't really seem like it was spiking, and we're like, that's really weird. I expected way more people to be using this. So next day, usability testing something else, and someone's talking about building an email, and I'm like, oh, could you show me how you create an email? And so as they're going through and they're adding these different images, we noticed that the ability to upload an image was actually the default state, and the image library, this gallery of all the stock photos, was actually a secondary state. You had to tab to it, and it wasn't really totally noticeable. And so we're like, man, I totally bet that's why the feature engagement, we didn't see the spike we thought we would. So we changed it, and we changed the default order. It was like 3-point ticket or something like that. And because of that, all of a sudden feature engagement just goes through the roof. We're like, that's what was missing. So if you think about it in terms of storytelling, going back to this, a lot of times for boot camps, particularly, people that are new to UX are very fixated on what they've done. I did this exercise, I have this deliverable, I have this persona, whatever. But that thing itself is not necessarily valuable. It's what you've done with it, And so if I made personas and I just left them on my desk, kind of a waste of money, So in this case, it's like, this is where we were. We just shipped this thing and we're like, man, this is gonna be amazing. And then, from testing, usability testing, something else, we actually learned that, actually through metrics too, we learned one, people weren't using it, and two, that this is probably why, based on, an anecdotal thing. And because of that, we actually made this improvement. And so the work from this team, like 7 developers making 6 figures, wasn't wasted. And essentially we tweaked it, and a small tweak made the feature engagement, go off the chart. So that's the first example. That's a short-term thing. So again, when you're looking at your projects and you're thinking about how can I emphasize this thing to show the value of the work I've done, it could be a small thing like that. And a small thing like that could make a dramatic impact on the business. So that was just changing tabs. So another story, and let me mute everybody again. It's like constant battle with the mute button. Another story. So working at Threat Quotient, we have these dashboards that we were creating, and so part of that was we wanted to create a customizable dashboard that each one of our customers essentially has different data, and so they need to be able to build a dashboard to represent the data that they have. And so as we were going through the project, we mapped it out. We were heads down on phase 1, about to ship phase 1. Meanwhile, from a design standpoint, we're selling to the company the value of phase 2. Like, oh, it's going to do this and this and this, and it's going to be awesome. Everybody's super on board. So phase 1 ships. The dev team is starting to focus on phase 2. And we're like, well, let's test what we have, So we tested with prototypes, but now it's real. So let's actually see what customers are doing. Let's see what they're struggling with. Is there anything we missed? And so part of that, we would actually have customers stack rank. Here are the things we're going to do in phase 2. What do you think? If you could order these based on priority of what would be useful for you, what would you do? And so phase 2, let's say it was A, B, and C features. Well, it turns out after talking to people, A was useful, but B and C were not particularly useful. However, based on how they're using it, there's actually D. And so there's a new thing added to the mix. And the other 2 things, B and C, were actually expensive, and now we don't have to make them. So it's awesome. So again, pointing to the value of usability testing, it wouldn't necessarily be the fact that we did the testing. it would be, hey, we actually impacted the roadmap. We were going to do A, B, and C, but now we're doing A and D. It actually saves us time and money, and we didn't build the wrong things and have to continue to support them, and we also built the right thing. So again, going back to that storyline, this is where we were. It's like we shipped it and we're like, yeah, we're going to do it. Let's do phase 2. Then from talking to customers, we actually learned that some of the things we planned, they were assumptions and they were wrong. So we actually discovered something else too. And because of that, we actually didn't build the wrong thing, but we built the right thing. So this is, 2 examples. One is short term, changing tabs. The other one is longer term. Here's how I influence bigger scope. We're going to go this way. Now we're going this way as a company. And so that's a way to kind of position these things in terms of the value that storytelling and UX could do. So let me jump forward. Okay, so second story arc I have is around setting expectations and getting buy-in. So this one's a little bit different. So essentially it is, this is where we are, this is where we want to be, and this is how we're going to get there. And so this is something I've used in the past to, build out a team or build out processes or anything like that. And so the other thing is you got to make sure you have the basic elements of the plan here, where essentially it's like, what are we doing, who's doing it, and when is it going to be done? So now I have 3 tips for better stories. And let me see something real quick. Look at this deck again. Okay, got it. So this is a picture from 2018. It was back before COVID was like, it was actually like right before COVID really hit, where we had a team get together, and it was awesome. I'm right here, which I don't know if you can tell, but anyway, so during this, I actually had to give a presentation to the entire company, and it was here's essentially what we've done with design, here's how things are shaping up, here's how things are better, that kind of stuff. And I had like all kinds of content, and I had to cut out, because I only had like 15 minutes or whatever. But part of it, I was like, man, we solidified our design process. We're including more research than ever. We created and implemented a design system. Our product looks way better than ever. We ship tons of useful features, and customers are giving us all these endorsements, essentially unsolicited, which is awesome. So going through this, I'm on a high. I'm like, dude, we killed it. We did all these things. They're super meaningful. Guess what resonated with the crowd? So part of it was we had this scoring slider. And so when we implemented this, we didn't use a library. We did, like, I guess the developer at the time did like this custom hand-coded version, which was really buggy and didn't really work very well. And so one of our customers actually said, they're like, whoever designed this must be trying to punish us, which is kind of hilarious if you think about it. But part of it, so this was actually the interface we changed it to, which was way better in so many different ways. There was like notches, there's number, like all kinds of stuff. So of all the things we did, revamping our entire design process, having more research, all that kind of stuff, this is the thing that everybody fixated on for some reason. So in the hallway, it's like, dude, that's crazy about that slider. I'd love to get UX involved in this other thing. So there's other teams that were like, man, how do we work with you guys closer so we can start to leverage what you're doing for our stuff? And meanwhile, I'm thinking like, I have to wow them with all these big projects and unique things. Turns out this stupid slider thing, everybody's like, this is amazing, So part of it is sometimes we're so close to the product, and we also feel such a need to show this like monumental, profound thing that we've discovered. But sometimes these little things are actually more valuable. And something like this, you might have the dev team who, for example, they've wanted to fix the slider forever, and we're like, it's not a priority right now, and they're kind of like losing their minds because, quality craftsmanship, and they're just, this represents them, So if you're able to use UX to highlight some of these things, these pain points, and then get them prioritized, a lot of times that will be a reason why, other teams might want to collaborate with you, because they're like, man, when we work with you, we can prioritize different things or have customer backing to show why these things are a priority. So that's, So anyway, so tip number 1 is don't shy away from simple examples in your storytelling. Sometimes the most simplistic examples are the ones that resonate, and people will remember those things, and it really kind of builds a positive momentum. And so that's I think it's a good example of that. So next thing, don't let facts get in the way of a good story. So one of the people I was working with through Design Lab, they actually were working on an app that helped people with pour over coffee and educating them on different things to do and how to do it. And I still don't fully understand it because I'm just like a caveman in that way. But anyway, so she's working on this thing. She actually went through and she made all these different wireframes. She actually made paper wireframes for things. And she went to a coffee shop and she talked to a barista and she talked to all kinds of different people and she had them go through the interface, but she didn't take photos of it. And I'm like, go back to that coffee shop or a coffee shop and stage some photos. Like, it doesn't have to be people. You could have things on a desk, whatever. Don't let the fact that you missed that opportunity ruin your story for the project. So she went back and she placed them on a desk and she took a photo. So this goes back to portfolio pieces. So some of the people I work with, they have, when you're starting out for UX, you have a limited portfolio. So you have 2, 3 projects, whatever it is. And your first project's probably not your best. Big surprise. So my advice would be you can go back and adjust things and make it better. So, essentially for this, pictures or didn't happen. I'm just gonna let this play because I just like this guy. He's an idiot. Smart. Anyway, so I think it's okay to revisit old designs you're not happy with. I think it's okay to stage photos to represent a situation that happened. And also another thing, if you're part of a team so I've worked with some people where they accepted jobs and they weren't totally thrilled with it. And working somewhere, if you're not totally happy with the process that they have, you can kind of like gloss over that or add things that are supplemental to it, or just because the entire team doesn't do something doesn't mean you can't show it as part of your portfolio and show that like this is part of the process and I know it's valuable. So which actually leads me to one other thing in terms of storytelling. Another piece of advice I've been given that I really like is run towards your next role, not away from your last. And so as you're telling these stories, make sure to include the positive things. And if there's any negative things or dynamics with team members and that kind of stuff, just leave it out. It doesn't really help anything. And, so, but anyway, so things you can include within your storytelling, short customer clips that illustrate a point. Generally, I try to keep them under 30 seconds. I think 30 seconds people kind of gloss over and stop paying attention. Animated GIFs for interfaces. There's actually a software called Record It. Let me touch this in the chat. So if you go to recordit.co, it's for Mac. You can install it. There's like a little toolbar at the top. You drag a little rectangle and then you click play, and whatever you do within that will be converted to an animated GIF, which is super helpful. A lot of times when I'm doing a presentation for the company or there's a series of presentations on one of the presenters, it's good to have everything in your slide deck rather than having to leave your slide deck, which then introduces introduces chance for things to go wrong, essentially. So for me, if I can record a screen or demonstrate some sort of action, I'll use the animated GIF and put it in my slide deck. It's just way better. And then of course, customer testimonials are always great too. So last thing I'll say, actually, is this the last tip? I don't remember. So tip number 3, keep a project journal. There are 3 different times you could document a project. You could document it as it's happening, after it's completed, or months later after you've moved on and likely forgotten. I'm guilty of the last one sometimes. However, I actually like doing design mentorship because it forces me to relive a bunch of stories over and over again. So I kind of keep them sharp. But it is worth documenting things like team dynamics. So I can think of a time working with a developer where I was trying to review their work and they kept getting frustrated with me because like I would give them feedback for things and they're just like, dude, like, why are you like constantly on my ass about this project? And so I pull them aside and I'm like, what's going on here? Like what's the deal? And they're like, well, dude, I'm not even done the work and you're already trying to review it. And I'm like, oh, so it was my fault, going through these things, trying to proactively get feedback. I thought I was being helpful, really I was being annoying, So that's an example of something in terms of dynamics that maybe I write that down. And so in the future, imagine you're interviewing somewhere or whatever. It's like, hey, could you think of a situation where this happened? Well, now you have all these different stories at your fingertips that you can kind of call upon. Like, yeah, totally. There's one time I was working on this thing and this happened, So next thing I'll say is you can make a template for different things. And so for us, actually one of the designers that works on my team, Bella, is phenomenal in terms of like, making templates and outlining UX research and all that kind of stuff. So if you make a template, then it becomes much easier to tell a story, and all you have to do is fill out the template. So here's an example of one of the templates she has. Um, you'll notice that she'll kind of have these different categories like onboarding experience or whatever, kind of like works across the side. She also has for each of those, so you'll see, so there's this, which is like test processing key findings. She has like sort of the high level things, but then she'll actually tie this onboarding experience with other slides, which will show the design revisions. And a lot of times some people will ask me like, how do I show before and after kind of shots? This is generally how, she's been doing it. And I think it works really well, where you have the improvements on the side, you have a screenshot of before with like bullet points of why it didn't work. And then you have after, which is bullet points of why it now works better. So bonus tip, and my last tip before I'm pretty much wrapping up, is you can make a video for yourself. So I can think of projects I've worked on in the past where, you're working on something and it gets shelved for some reason. Some other priority comes up, or, this isn't as high of a priority or whatever it is. So a lot of times what I'll do, sometimes there's a project and you feel it's natural to go down a certain train of thought in terms of how to solve a problem. And you get down that, path a little bit and you realize like, oh man, this actually doesn't work for, various reasons. And so sometimes when a project gets shelved, I'll actually use QuickTime on my computer and I'll make a video of me explaining the project to myself. So I'll say, hey, Bob, you're going to want to go down this path, but it doesn't work. And here's why. And so I can kind of shortcut, my onboarding for the project again, so that in the future, they're like, hey, we're picking this thing up again. I pop open a video, I watch a 90-second recap of me just like ranting about something and showing designs and whatever. And all of a sudden I'm right up to speed. So yeah. Also, I can share the video with people. I know people are kind of commenting on that. So anyway, so reasons I do this, right? So I'm explaining a project, where I'm leaving it before I shelf it. Maybe stop myself from exploring something, same path twice. Or a lot of times what I'll do is if I want to get feedback on a design, I may actually make a recording of me going through the design and talking through it. And then I'll send that to 5 or 6 people on Slack. I'll be like, hey, watch this video and then hit me up when you're ready to talk about it. And so that way I don't have to do the same demo 1,000 times to different people, so it saves a lot of time. So, and I have it on reference. So in the future, if I'm like, why did we make this dumb decision? I can go back and watch that video and be like, oh, that's why, so it's kind of good for documentation. So, all right, recap. So here's what we talked about. Storytelling is a UX tool, the value of a product vision, rallying teams behind it. Are you closer to the flag, further from the flag, that kind of thing, prioritizing in that way. Brief intro of who I am, easy to understand, easy to use story arcs, tips for compelling stories. Now we're ready for questions. So let's see. So I did post the link. I'm going to post it again in here. So it's from Slido. And you can go in there and essentially type in questions. I'll go from there. The only question in there so far, I know I posted at the very beginning, is it possible to share the recording? And I'll definitely share the recording, assuming it comes out okay. So feel free to type in questions. Meanwhile, let me scroll through the chat, see what I missed. Not many questions in there. Okay, let's see. So would you recommend using different story arcs when presenting multiple case studies? Let me think about that. I think when you're presenting a case study, your goal is to try to build trust in your ability to do something. And so I think I'd stick with the first one, where it's like, this is where we were, this is what we learned, and this is how we improved. I think that's probably the most valuable. The one thing I will say is a lot of times I see more green designers that will have really long case studies. And one of the things I've learned is in a project, multiple things happen and there's multiple aspects to a project. And so what you could do is you can tease out different stories from the same project. So for example, imagine your project has a design system as part of it. Well, you can actually make that its own project and essentially talk about that in its own way. And so now you're getting more mileage out of one project than having just one monolithic thing. So, but I would probably keep roughly that same story arc. Um, yeah, okay. So let's see. So next one, how many cases you need to show in our portfolio? I guess like assuming you're looking for a role in UX, I think typically like 2 to 3. You don't want to bombard people with too many things. I think the secret is, so imagine I'm a hiring manager and I'm looking to hire somebody. Making a case study, you're kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't. For some reason, if you don't have a case study, it seems like you have zero process, which is not the case, but maybe sometimes. But if you write out a whole case study and you have a really long page, probably not going to read it, So a lot of times what I'll do when I'm going to assess someone's skill set, I first go to their homepage. I think, do I like this? And if I do, then I'm like, cool. Let me look at the thumbnails for their projects. Do I care? Do I like them? And when I look at it, like generally when I'm looking to hire somebody, I'm thinking, how much time do I have to invest in you to get you up to speed so I can do other things? So anything you can do to show, taking initiative or being proactive, that kind of thing, being organized. Soft skills are so important. That's like super valuable to me. So I go to the homepage, I look at it, I'm like, okay, this is cool. I look at the thumbnails, I'm like, yeah, this project is similar to something we might do. I would then click on it. Then from there, I look for the high fidelity version because I'm like, is this the quality of work that we would do? If it is, then cool. I'll skim through. Oh, cool. Looks like you did some researchy things. Well, you know what? I'm busy today, so I'm going to schedule a call with you. You can tell me all about it during a portfolio readout. And so that's generally how I would handle it. And on top of that, so maybe in the morning, I'm sitting there and I'm looking at resumes and I look at 15 and then all of a sudden someone messages me a question and then my day kicks in and then, it's till tomorrow that I start looking at things again. So anything you do to capture their attention, I always push people, you could make videos for portfolio things and post a 90-second recap of what a project is. Benefit is you get to make sure I hear the thing you want me to. I also get to hear your voice. I get to hear how you talk about design and it keeps my attention, and it's also a differentiator. Nobody really seems to do that. So maybe good. So let's see. So can I share one more example of setting expectations and getting buy-in? Okay. So an example there would be, we are working on the design system. So essentially, man, a little bit of a story. When I first started at Threat Quotient, it was like very early on in the business. I was like the third hire. And for the longest time, I would have to wear the hat between design and product. And so over the years, I would have to make different decisions where, depending on the day, I'd wear a different hat. It's like, well, this isn't polished enough. We should hold it back. That'd be the designer in me. But from product management standpoint, like, well, who cares? Because people don't have this and it provides value. So get it out, So over the years, we would, ship things or not ship things, depending on, what's going on in the business and what we have to do. And from that, we created a lot of design debt and tech debt. And so in terms of the, setting expectations, getting buy-in, this is where we were. So when you build a design system, first thing you do is you take an inventory of all of the elements you have. I'll make a slide deck. I'll put, here's a slide with all the buttons, screenshot everything. Here's a slide with all the headings, screenshot everything. And so going, here's where we are. Everything is very inconsistent. And here's what we've learned, understanding these different things, like it's giving a fractured experience for customers. It's also slowing down development and all that kind of stuff. And so because of that, we actually push to have this design system and here's what it is and here's why it's better, that kind of thing. So kind of winging that one a little bit. Hopefully it kind of answers the question, but maybe not. I don't know. I can think of other things. If you throw an ADPlist session, I'm sure I could answer that. So let's see. So we did another story. How many case studies? Do I have a specific tool to make all this documentation? I typically use Google Slides and Confluence for a lot of stuff. Our team actually uses Confluence for most of the things. And we actually have all of our project documentation in one place. So both the engineering stuff as well as design docs and things like that. For anything personal, I use Evernote just because I'm old. And I think everybody uses Notion now. And I would switch, but it's just not worth the effort to dump notes into something else. So I'd probably use Notion, I guess. Like that seems like what everybody's using. What would be the perfect balance of ratios when it comes to the word choices and the deliverables? I'm not sure I totally understand that question. Let me perfect balance of ratios, word choices, and deliverables. I think think about it this way. Like imagine I design a dashboard. Okay, let's make it about our customers. So our customers, they run security teams, and so they put together a dashboard that represents different security metrics, whatever. And so there's one world where I hand you a dashboard. I say, here's the dashboard. And then you have to go through and figure out what to take away from that dashboard. There's another world where I say, here's a dashboard. This widget represents this. When it's red, it means this is bad, And so you're essentially telling me what to take away from the metrics. And so I would think of that the same way from a UX deliverable. So here's the persona. You can read it on your own. However, the takeaway from this should be X, Y, and Z. Or here's a journey map. Here's the experience of what it's like to become a new customer. And in this, there are different parts that are, not pleasing or whatever. So let me demonstrate why these things aren't pleasing. The journey map itself is saying like, hey, I did this exercise. Here's how I arrived at this conclusion. I'd be happy to share it with you in detail. However, if you want a shortcut, here's really the takeaways from the exercise I did and what we should do because of it. So let's see. So, okay, so the question in the other chat, for a case study, essentially, how long should it be is what I'm reading there. I don't know that I totally have an answer for that. I know a lot of the boot camps will require you to have all the deliverables you've done because they're essentially trying to show how much experience you would have. But I would say if it's not valuable to the story, like maybe put it in for your bootcamp, certificate or whatever. But then after that, if it's not valuable to the story and you find that when you tell the story, you tend to want to skip it, I would probably take it out. It's not particularly useful. And then the other thing I always recommend for people, you can have bonus slides. So part of it is when you're applying for jobs, you want to put together a slide deck of your portfolio. You don't want people to click through your portfolio as a website. It's not as organized or professional. And so a lot of times what you can do is you can have bonus slides at the end. So imagine that you don't necessarily want to talk about the persona you made for the project. You can allude to it briefly. And then if people ask questions later, you can jump to the end of your slide deck and be like, oh, I have a slide for that. Let me talk through this. And so essentially, you're not including it in your story, but you're also not forfeiting the ability to talk about it. And you still look organized and like a rock star kind of thing. So let's see. This seems like a fun question. What are some tips for representing projects that did not go well for reasons out of the team's control? For example, scrapped in development due to budgeting constraints. Okay. I equate that to, so I actually worked on a freelance project maybe a couple of years ago. It was for a cryptocurrency exchange. And I went through and I mapped everything out and I did all the work and, it looked awesome. Like I was really happy with it. And after I handed off, I got paid, which was nice. It's good to get paid. But then after that, they never actually built it, And so I think that, at least from my perspective, if first off, like who's your audience, because you can demo work that hasn't gone into production and people may not even know, So unless they're experts in your product is really accessible, they may have no clue that it actually shipped or not, So at that point, you could just talk about it anyway. But the cryptocurrency exchange thing, I definitely put it in my portfolio because I like it, So I think that there's work there. The work is applicable to other things. The work in terms of UI design or interaction design or whatever, it still demonstrates my skill set, So whether that made it into production, whether it got delayed, who cares? To me, it's more talking through the thing. Maybe you have to, in your conclusion, maybe you write something about how like this is, going to be prioritized soon or something like that. But I also don't think you necessarily have to draw attention to it, and I don't think that people are necessarily looking for if it went into production or not. So I guess maybe if there's absence of like metrics for tracking success or something, maybe that comes up. But you can still tell a good story and show your work without having to go into those things. So let's see. Should we make our case studies the same design consistently? Sure. I don't think there's like a hard and fast rule for that. I think you can kind of do whatever, but it would make your life easier. I mean, let's be honest, working on your portfolio is probably like the worst thing in the world. So anything to make that less painful for you is probably better, you know. So I'd probably keep them consistent, and then you could deviate from it later if you needed to. But it goes back to if you have a template for something, same with like the UX research stuff, then it becomes an exercise of filling in the information rather than reinventing the wheel every single time. So I think it'd just be easier for you. But I don't think you would get like penalized for it uh, not being consistent unless like it was like glaringly inconsistent. And I also think that you wouldn't be penalized if it was consistent. So let's see. How many UXers are on a project or a team? Second question, how close do you work with UX researchers? So for us, we're a smaller company. And so therefore everything is sort of like everybody's a generalist where we're at. I would say typically a UX person is paired with a product manager. And so the product manager is more the early requirements discovery stuff, although the UX person's there for that as well. And they really much overlap. Like a good UX person is very business centric, and a good product person is very customer centric. So I think there's a little bit of, doesn't have to be turf wars. It could just be like you do this and I do that, and we're all pulling on the same rope kind of thing. And then in terms of how close would we work with UX researchers, I don't really, the only advice I could give there, because I haven't worked somewhere where there's dedicated people, it's always been essentially us doing our own things. I would say in that case, it would probably be, as long as they understand the essence of the project, and they're, a lot of times when we're about to usability test something or research something, we will crowdsource a list of questions, and the questions may come from the dev team, it may come from the UX team or product, and it's like, what do we want to learn, during this thing, and so we'll gather that list of things that we're trying to figure out, and then from that we'll make a discussion guide. So I would think that you would want to work pretty closely with them during that phase. Honestly, I find it weird when designers don't want to watch people using their software. So I would want to be in on every session I could, to be honest. I never really understood the, tell me what happened thing. I want to see it myself and understand and ask questions myself a lot of times. So I would probably want to work as close as I can with them, I would think. So let's see. What are your best tips for storytelling UX in design challenge interviews? I think that, so you're not really telling a story because it's happening real time. But my one piece of advice for a design challenge is, a lot of times you have a short window of time to do stuff. So it's kind of like a little bit fake, And so there's one world where you cram and you stay up all night and you do all this research, do all these things. There's another world where you do a little bit of research, you formulate some sort of persona or opinion or whatever, and then you base all the rest of your project, pretty much phrasing it like, based on my assumptions of this being true, this is our target audience and these are their needs. Based on those assumptions, this design is probably what I would have, And so therefore, your design, there's no right or wrong answer. It's really like, if this is this way, then this would be this way. And if this is wrong, then obviously the design would change, So a lot of times I kind of phrase it more in that way, These are assumptions we have. In the real world, I'd probably go and do a little bit more research to validate these are true. However, for the sake of time, let's assume they're true. based on that, this is what I would do, and work through your problem that way. So, all right, so just a note, I connected. I don't know what that means. Oh, I connect. Oh, I see. So that the slider story resonated more with somebody than the big content stories. Okay, the big content stories. I've gotten feedback in the past that maybe it's like a little bit too inside baseball, but you know. Okay, for case study boot camps, often tell us to quote every detail. Would you say including things like mind map and personas are part of storytelling? They're part of it if it's compelling and it impacted something. For example, imagine I get money and they're like, Bob, we're going to hire, we just got an influx of funding and we're going to be able to build the team. If we give you money for design, what do we get? You know, and the CEO might phrase it that way. It's like, what do we get? And we'll go to marketing and be like, hey, we just got money. So if we hire someone from marketing, what do we get? And so the CEO doesn't care about personas or any of these different things. They care about the output and the outcomes from those things. So if I can demonstrate why a persona is useful and how it changed something, that's valuable. If I just put personas in front of the CEO, they'd be like, what is this? Like, I don't care about this. So maybe it's a little bit more ruthless business kind of thing. But in the end, it is money being invested for some sort of outcome. So you always have to remind yourself, we are very close to the UX process and we're very passionate about these different things. They serve a purpose, they help influence the team, all those kind of things. But it's the influence of the team that's really the value and why we're doing them. It's not for the sake of having the best deliverable, you know? So, okay. How many people receive the project documentation? What happened? Okay. For the project documentation, I mean, like I said, we have Confluence and the whole team has access to it. So we just kind of have a shared understanding that you go to this page, bookmark it, and then look for the project. And then there's both dev documentation as well as like design specs and other things like that. So let's see. What is the best storytelling technique in your experience to get the entire product team on the same mind frame about the product vision? I think that could be maybe a little bit misguided of a question where maybe it's not necessarily your job to convince them, but it's more to bring them along for the ride and maybe share the research responsibility with them. I mean, every team's different, and I don't know if that is realistic where you're at, but generally, I found that if I were to sit up here and tell people something, it kind of would work. But if I show it to them, then they're like, man, I get it. So it's sort of like a show, don't tell. But then also, we used to have an open door policy where engineering could sit in on calls for products they're working on, or product managers or customer support or whoever. And it's just nothing but positivity, and it boosts morale a lot for people if they get to see customers actually going through and doing things. Again, I could think of a call where a customer was struggling with a bug. The developer was sitting in there. That bug had been kicked from sprint to sprint to sprint, where everybody's like, I don't feel like working on that. And because of the call, the developer went back to their desk and like, dude, I figured it out in a half hour. It's done. And it's all because they saw the person struggling. They're like, oh man, there's really someone using this, and I get it, and I understand why it's frustrating. I didn't really think about that before. I was more focused on our process or whatever we're working on at the moment or internal whatever, and so it kind of humanizes things. And I think humanizing things and bringing people along for the ride, it just makes it more personal, and then they take away their own information from it. So I think that's really the best motivator, is show, don't tell. How do you handle teammates who never back their words with facts or research? In a mastering most of the time, waste time arguing, and it's frustrating. Totally get it. That's actually not that uncommon, unfortunately. And if you think about it, like, especially for more senior people, there's sort of different mentalities. And those people may have built a career around not doing facts and research and stuff. And they were successful. And so therefore, for you to be like, hey, you need to do this, they're like, what do you know? I've been doing this for 20 years this way. But I do think that it comes down to picking your battles. And so for me, first off, if a project's already in flight and you go and you try to implement all this process for it, right? And the team's already agreed this is the scope and this is what we're doing, you're just going to piss everybody off and you're going to hate it. So for me, it's like, all right, cool. Missed that boat. When's the next boat come? You know, so you can start to phase in process by fixating on the next project and be like, hey, last project, I noticed we didn't really do this thing. Could we do it for this project? And kind of propose like just this little change here. And the next project, we're just going to do just these two little changes here. You kind of slowly add it, and hopefully over time, the value is realized from that. So I think there's that. There was another thing I was going to say along that line, but I can't remember. But that's generally how I tend to do things, is like roll things out. Like I remember what it was. I actually, so I used to phrase things like, hey, should we do some customer research? Research is not a very cool word, and I think that for people like that who are like, why would Henry, what was it, the Henry Ford quote? It's like, if we ask people what they wanted, they say faster horses, like that kind of thing, You're like, well, it's kind of a cop out, So from my perspective, for something like that, if I phrase it, should we get some feedback rather than should we do some research, which is the same thing, a lot of times you kind of sound like an asshole if you don't want to get feedback on your project. Like, I don't need feedback, I'm too good for that, So if you ask if we should get feedback, a lot of times people are like, totally, let's do it. And they're like, great, usability testing it is, customer discovery calls it is, whatever it is. So if you phrase it that way, a lot of times better. The other thing I've learned is sometimes you don't have to ask permission for things. And over time, I've sort of realized that a lot of people that I don't directly report to, who are just adjacent in the company, I'll be almost asking them permission, like, should I do this? Should I talk to customers? Whatever. Really, I'm proposing it, saying this is a good idea and we should do it, but I'm giving them the option to say no or reject it in some way. And the reality is, what about the QA team? So the QA team, they're going to write automated tests, right? Have they ever once consulted design to say, hey, should we write automated tests for this? They just do it, right? So my perspective is, if there's certain things you should do, just start doing them. And then you can point to the results of it, And obviously there's going to be barriers in place and stuff like that. Again, this goes back to that one story arc, let's go back, let's do it. It's actually a perfect question for this. Okay, this is where we are. This is where we want to be. This is how we get there. Today, we don't do any research. It's like whoever is paid highest in the room, we argue to death, and then the gladiator at the top wins, right? So where do we want to be? Well, this is our process now, and I want to inject this and this. Start small, right? Small changes. And ultimately, this is how we're going to get there. So for this next project, we are going to have at least 3 customer calls. For this next project, we're going to have, I don't know, an empathy map, whatever it is. So you can go through and you can kind of pick out, like, let me just understand what happens now. And now that I have a really solid understanding of that, this part sucks. Let's change it. Let's do this different. All right, good. Move forward a month. All right, well, that went better. Let's change this part. You kind of focus on little pieces and kind of integrate things that way. So let's see. What tools do you use to collect data for user interviews? I happen to use Excel, and it isn't always the most. No, it's not. That sounds really horrible, actually. So typically for us, we have a few different things. And granted, like, we have to get better about documenting research. But first, we started out where we had a Confluence page, and so we created a discussion guide for each project we would have, and we would make a table, and it'd be each time we talk to a customer. We keep in mind too, I think it depends on the company. So if you have thousands of users, right, then like maybe it's different than for us, which we have a small amount of high-paying customers, let's say. So what we would do is we go through, we use a certain discussion guide for a call. We have a table on this Confluence page, which is like user discovery kind of thing. And we would have different columns. So it'd be who was the customer, what were the rough topics we talked about, a link to the discussion guide, a link to the recording, and the date. And we'd use that, which is very grassroots, but it works. Then we started to use, we wanted to get a little bit more formal in terms of tracking work. And so what we would do is we would use Jira, and then we would have epics for different projects, and we would start to every customer call, even though like it's not allowed to add to the sprint, whatever, we would add a new ticket to the sprint, which would be marked as user discovery, and then we would put in the notes in there, attach the recording of the ticket, and make sure it's in the epic. And so later, when we're going back and looking at the dashboard epic, we're like, oh, cool, we talked to 6 customers about this. Here's the recording. Here's the takeaway. I've seen people do that. I've seen people do a rolling whiteboard thing. So essentially what they would do is they would have a whiteboard in their space. We work remote, so it doesn't work quite as well. You could use Miro or something like that. And at the end of each call, you have a debriefing where essentially you write down different bullet points of, takeaways you had. And next to those, you put P1 for participant 1. Then you have the next call and you go through and you're like, well, bullet point number 2, P2 had that too, P2 next to that. Let's add a couple to the bottom that P1 didn't have. And so as you go on, you have like P1, P2, P4, P5. You have a bunch of participants next to one bullet point. Well, clearly that bullet point must be of value, and therefore, like, let's put that at the top and use that to kind of prioritize your findings. So, downside is, I remember at AWeber, we would do that kind of thing, and like someone would come in, like erase the whiteboard, and we're like, oh, and everybody freak out. So there's that too. We'd take a photo like at the end of every day, just in case. How do you respond to high-level stakeholders who equate good visual sign with being shallow or fluffy? Sometimes my enterprise clients hate when an application website looks too good, even when the users get positive feedback. Yeah. It's an interesting question. Well, let's think about that. So the project, when you're designing something, you're gonna have certain goals, right? People need to be able to do X, Y, and Z. Imagine you break it down to primary and secondary workflows. These are the main things people do. These are the secondary things people will do. And so you go through and you have your design. It looks super amazing, right? But you test it and those workflows are completed and they're successful. So that could point to this is not being too shallow or fluffy. This design's actually functional. The other side is from a prioritization standpoint, putting on my PM hat now. Imagine you spend all this time, you're like, we're gonna have this animation, it's gonna be super quirky, it's gonna do these things, whatever. Or just like basic animations and stuff. And let's say the dev team is not as comfortable doing those things or they haven't before. If that takes a period of time, everything is a priority, or everything is competing for attention, if it comes down to doing that, or doing something else that may provide value for more customers or is more tangible, the product manager may opt for that because it's actually more bang for the buck for the business. So I think that's one of the things is like, why are they pushing back on it being shallow? Is it because there are other things to work on? Is it because they think maybe you're going down a rabbit hole of too much polish? I have no idea. But if you can tie it back to, well, this thing's functional and it works, then technically there shouldn't be an issue unless it's like one of the other things. So, cool. All right. Well, I am at the end of the hour. And so what I'm going to do is hopefully the recording came out okay. I will share it with people. If you message me, please add me on LinkedIn. I love connecting with people. I love talking about design and product and all the things. Here, I'll post a link to my thing. So here's this. Awesome. So hit me up. I'm happy to give advice for random things, and I love talking through company dynamics and I don't know, like leadership and all the different things. So if there's anything you want to work through or any work things or really anything about design, like just hit me up and I'm happy to jump on a call. So cool. Okay, well, with that, I will see you guys later, and let me figure out how to stop recording.